Washington has retaliated for the deaths of 3 American soldiers who were killed in a drone attack on a US military base in Jordan. Reports indicate the airstrikes have hit multiple targets in Iraq and Syria.
We understand that they have hit 85 targets in Syria and in Iraq using 125 precision weapons, using long-range bombers, in some cases flown from the United States to do this attack. We are getting reports from official and unofficial sources here in Iraq and also in Syria. Let me quickly tell you what we are hearing. Attacks in the eastern province in Syria of Deir ez-Zor. The Americans have hit 2 cities there, Mayadeen and El-Bu Kamal. They have also hit the western region of Iraq, Anbar province as well. There are reports now coming through of fatalities and injuries, at least 10 militia members, some of those non-Syrian, now being reported by Syrian state media. This is clearly a very serious attack. It's clearly the beginning of what is a new phase in this regional conflict, a conflict that began in Gaza on October 7th. This is a new phase, a dangerous new phase for everybody involved. It's a calculated response from the Americans, really important to say that. They've had 6 days to think about this attack, that since the strike by an Iran-backed militia on Post 22, Tower 22 in Jordan. The Americans have had time to think about this. They've had time to choose their targets. They've had time to think about the message that each target, each attack sends. And here in Iraq, a great deal of anxiety has been caused, paranoia as well. Those 6 days also giving time for members of these militias, senior members of these militias. It's given them time to hide, also to hide their weapons and their arsenal. But make no doubt about it, this is a major new escalation in this regional campaign, this regional conflict.
A major new escalation, but also a developing one. To get reaction on this, I'm joined live by a senior analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, Malcolm Davis. Malcolm, we knew that a response was coming by the US following the attacks on this base that killed 3 US soldiers in northeast Jordan and wounded others. Your response initially to what's just happened overnight?
Well, look, I think it was pretty much what I expected. I did have some misgivings about the delay in responding and also the way the Biden administration telegraphed its intent to the Iranians to the point whereby the senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders and personnel and the militias could essentially safely evacuate from Iraq and Syria into Iran. So in a sense, by telegraphing that attack, that reduced the effectiveness of that attack in one sense. But the Americans are very keen to avoid escalation here. And so what they didn't want to do was inflict heavy casualties on the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in particular that would then force Iran to retaliate. I still think the Iranians, through their proxies, will retaliate at some point. This is certainly not over. And, the Biden administration is making clear that this is the first in a series of strikes. So we will remain focused on what happens in the coming hours, days, and weeks ahead. But clearly, this was the response that everyone has been waiting for.
Yeah, we're getting statements and responses coming out in the media gradually. An Iraqi military spokesperson in a statement reported by Reuters says these airstrikes constitute a violation of Iraqi sovereignty, undermine the efforts of the Iraqi government and pose a threat that could lead Iraq and the region into dire consequences. And so far, there's been reports that 13 people have been killed in those strikes in eastern Syria, but as you mentioned, no indication that they are senior members of militia that are backed by Iran.
Yeah, exactly. And if the Iraqi government is talking about its sovereignty, maybe it shouldn't have allowed its territory to be used by Iran to stage attacks on US forces. The Iranians have basically infiltrated every aspect of Iraqi society and Iraqi government to the point whereby I think that the question of Iraqi sovereignty needs to be looked at hard. The US had to respond to the attacks that killed 3 soldiers. For the US not to respond would have been a horrendous signal weakness, not just to the Iranians, but also to Moscow and to Beijing. and I think it would have global consequences if the US hadn't responded effectively. Now, it's early days yet in terms of this campaign. How the Biden administration evolves this in terms of its operations in coming days and weeks, and how it essentially continues to attack the IRGC and the militias will be very interesting to see. But my main concern is that these US strikes are there to degrade the capabilities of the militias to carry out further attacks, but they won't create credible deterrence to such attacks with Iran. And so I fear that at some point in the future, the Iranians will launch more attacks that could kill more US service people. And then the pressure on the Biden administration to do something far more decisive than what we're seeing today will be immense.